Welcome to episode 6 of the Beyond podcast, where we have conversations with people who we find inspiring, who might inspire you too. Our special guest for today's episode is Brian Yao. Brian is currently a master's student and machine learning researcher at UC Berkeley, where he studies electrical engineering and computer science. He recently graduated from UC Berkeley, where he earned a bachelor's with the highest distinction and majored in computer science, applied mathematics, and statistics. During college, he played an active role in the Student Association for Applied Statistics, where he served various roles such as data science consultant and a senior advisor. Throughout college, Brian also interned as an algorithm developer intern at Hudson River Trading, a software development engineer intern at Amazon, and an applied statistics research intern at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Welcome, Brian. How's it going?
Hi, it's going pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I met Brian in New York. Brian is really, really awesome. So like one of my friends is a partner of Brian, and yeah, he's super cool. And I've talked to him about like a lot of different things, like his research, and he's given me a lot of great advice for like recruitment, especially during this cycle when I was recruiting full time. So let's just jump right into it. I guess let's
Sure.
talk about like your experiences in Berkeley. You
Mhm.
majored in like these three really challenging areas. How are you able to, um, like balance all that like workload all at the same time? And how are you able to, explore all these different interesting areas in these different fields at the same
Mhm.
time?
Yeah, totally. I guess for me, first off, it helped a lot that the three things I was majoring in had a lot of overlap. So because of
Mm,
that, in terms of like workload, it wasn't that much more than just doing like two majors. And I really enjoyed seeing how like all three of those fields connected really nicely. So it wasn't like crazy or anything. I think, if anything, like doing all three of them helped me like better understand like each of them separately, which is helpful. But I guess like in terms of actually handling that workload and like specific things I did, I would say that there's like generally two major things. First, and they're both kind of cliche, I guess, but we can walk through them. Or I guess like the first thing I guess would be like really trying hard to avoid burnout as hard as I could. Because I guess like it's really hard at Berkeley to overwork yourself, especially when you see like other people like working really hard like all of the time. So a pretty big thing for me was always like setting a time for myself just to like solidly relax and just like not do anything. I pretty much like designate like a 24-hour-ish period every week where I just wouldn't do any work and just like I don't know, hang out with friends, like watch sport games, whatever. Um, I think that was really helpful because the other thing, the other like overarching pillar that I would consider is like just having really efficient time management. And in particular, I guess like the main creed that I followed was sort of just being maximally efficient and like really committing to whatever you're doing. So by that specifically, I mean that like during the times where I was like relaxing, not doing anything, I think it was important to like super commit to that and really focus and just like not doing anything and not focus and not like thinking about work at all to like fully like relax. But then on the flip side, when you are doing work, I think it's like really important to be super efficient with your time and to like not waste anything like goofing around while you're working and to commit to whatever you're
mm.
doing at that time. So I think that's like probably the main thing for me, just being like very careful with how I manage my time and like whatever I was doing, whether it be like not working or working, to like really commit to whatever I was like doing at the time.
Yeah. I think you mentioned two really great things there. Like you mentioned like avoiding burnout, which I think is really, really important for like Berkeley students or any like college student who is, handling all this like academic and like club stuff and like
It's a lot
recruitment
of Berkeley,
stuff.
right? Like, people are always
Yeah,
doing that. Yeah.
so much. And then also you mentioned about like focus, right? So I was hoping to ask you more about like the burnout side of things because
Yeah.
I've known personally like especially during like fall semester when I'm recruiting and I'm taking these
Yeah.
tough courses, like let's say this year, I honestly struggle. Like I was taking 162, like our operating
I'm
systems
sorry.
class, and I was taking our database class, like 186, and we have like six projects for like
Yeah.
186, and we have like I think like four projects in 162, but they're really hard, and you have to
We're
work in a
all,
group.
yeah.
Yeah, and you have to communicate with like people across the world, and it's like really hard to manage. Like, what were some like key findings you found that were helpful for avoiding burnout? In addition to like making sure you like focus 100% on what you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, yeah, making sure to take time off is like really important. And
Mhm.
then besides that, the other thing that I would generally say is like another overarching pillar is to kind of know your limitations.
Mm,
Of course, like you should try doing as much as you can, I would say.
right.
But like at the same time, I don't think there's any problem with like kind of recognizing that you might have like bit off more than you can chew, and then taking measures to sort of like ameliorate that. I don't know. Like I think like letters and science at Berkeley offers like the late drop, right? To like
Mm,
drop a class like as late in the semester as you want. I think that's like a very like viable option. And or like taking a class pass no pass. Like those kinds of measures I think are very useful and are very like reasonable actions to come to if you can like recognize that maybe like your current workload is a little bit too much. Because it's funny that you mentioned like fall semester specifically, because I think like my senior year of fall, I was like really struggling a lot with the same combination you mentioned of just
mhm,
like very challenging coursework, recruiting, all those other things going on. And I think it was very helpful for me to like I like late dropped a class, like passed another class. And I think that was all like very helpful for me in terms of like avoiding that burnout. Because I think like being at Berkeley and maybe just the people that tend to be at Berkeley, you sort of want to do as much as you can, right?
right.
But I think that does tend to lead to burnout. And I think like recognizing that you don't have to do like everything is pretty important into like
Mhm,
avoiding like getting overwhelmed by everything you have going on.
mm. And I think like knowing your limits is also hard to swallow as well. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think goes
I had
hand
like
in hand.
technical red days. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like letting things go, right, is really hard. I know like a lot of students at Berkeley that I've spoke to, a lot of them who are my friends, did a lot of things in high school. And then they thought like, oh, I can just do the same thing in college. But then they have this realization that, college courses are like 10 times harder, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So did you have like any like problems letting go things in college to make room for like your studies or like your research or your other extracurriculars?
Yeah, I think yeah, I would probably say that happened like several times for me. I guess if I had to like narrow down some specific like cases, and I guess like my sophomore year, I was like trying really hard to like keep working part time. So I had like an internship after my freshman year, and then
Wow.
throughout like my sophomore year, I continued that internship and like was
Hmm.
working part time throughout that entire year. And honestly, like it just wasn't that worth it, and it was like very overwhelming. And I realized it was like more important for me to just focus on like school, which was like the main priority at the time. And as a result of that, I kind of sort of like dropped off on that like by the end of the year. Yeah, I think there's many other instances of that
Right.
as well. Yeah,
I think it's interesting you mentioned about like working part-time, like and like continuing an internship like
yeah,
while you're studying. I had a similar experience my freshman year when I was working at this startup and during the summer. And then I was talking to him, I was like, oh, I can balance like school and work at the same
yeah,
time. So I was
yeah.
like, okay, I can make a little bit of money as well. But then I
Right.
realized soon after, like I was kind of like spending less time like on certain things that I wanted to explore. Like I want to hang out with my friends more, do more things like outside of school. And then I realized that was a bigger priority than maybe, getting all this technical experience really quickly. So yeah, I think that was really a key lesson I learned. And it seems like you learned that too through a few
Yeah,
experiences.
totally. Yeah, I super felt like I was like losing out on like social experiences because like I felt like that was the first thing to go once I was like both working and like doing schoolwork. And I feel like that super contributes to, like burning out faster. So I think just like I don't know, hanging out with friends is always a good, really nice way to chill and like not get too overwhelmed by work. I think, but yeah, I think it's like nice to like recognize that that's like
Yeah,
not worth losing for the sake of more technical experience.
100%. And like, how do you identify when, like, when you're like on the verge of burning out, if
Yeah.
possible? Are there like things that you notice like, that are like key indicators of that for you personally?
Yeah. I guess like I try to like self introspect a little bit on those things. In particular, I guess like as indicators, I use like how much sleep am I getting? So I feel like that's like a pretty like
Yeah.
good indicator of like how hard am I working. And if I really feel like I'm just like super tired all the time from like I don't know not sleeping or just working too constantly all the time, then I can sort of recognize that. But yeah, I don't think there's any like super like concrete indicators. I feel like it's just more of just like do I feel overwhelmed? If yes, then I'm probably about to burn out.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And let's talk a little bit more about like what you did at Berkeley that you really enjoyed. Like I think you mentioned to me that you did a lot of like research work, which was super cool. Like how did you get involved in research as an undergrad? And like how do you fall in love with that area of research or get interested in that
Mhm.
area of research?
Yeah, sure. So my first research experience, I sort of just fell into. I think you mentioned that I was like, yeah, I had previously worked as like an applied statistics research intern at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So that was like sort of my first like research experience. And yeah, honestly, I don't know. I just like super fell into that. Where I was like, oh, this sounds cool. I don't really know what it is, but I'll like apply to this lab and like see what happens. And that was like a really like cool experience for me. Where I think at that point, I'd mostly just come into Berkeley as just like a math major, and I didn't really
Mm,
know like anything about like the applications of math in like statistics or computer science. And I think like that was a really eye-opening experience for me, where I was doing like some machine learning research, and that was the first time where I really saw like, okay, this is what I can use like all the theory and the tools that I've learned throughout my coursework and actually put them towards something real. So that was really fun for me. And in particular, I was like doing some research. I probably made it all time to get into like, the specifics, but it was like a physics project basically where we were working with like simulations of vehicles traveling at hypersonic speeds, so like 5 times the speed of sound or higher. And basically, like the issue with that field of research is that it's really hard to get data on hypersonic flight because no one has like hypersonic vehicles in their garage, right? Not really like a feasible thing to like test in real life. So typically, people run simulations instead. Um, and those simulations are very computationally intensive. They're solving like I don't know a bunch of PDEs and stuff uh, to basically simulate this real like physical environment. And my machine learning research was basically like sort of simulating the simulation, I guess, using like machine learning, where instead of running this complex simulation, we can just like learn what happens during the simulation and then use that to speed up like the results from getting the simulation in the first place. Um, so I thought that was really cool how it was sort of like a pure science project in some sense, where it was very grounded in physics, which I was like had no background in honestly. And it was interesting for me to see like how those things get applied. And I thought that was really interesting to see how like these tools in machine learning and statistics can get applied towards like more traditionally scientific fields. Now these days I work in like computational biology research, which I also thought was interesting for the same reason. I started out specifically because I wanted to work in like a research field that was still like sort of based in science, like biology or physics or whatever, but there were applications and opportunities to apply machine learning.
mm. You mentioned that you thought it was really cool, like applying concepts you've learned in class in like in research. Like, what were some of those concepts like from like your CS courses or like statistics that you used? Just out of like curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really big on like linear algebra and probability. Those are probably
Mhm.
like some of my favorite courses in Berkeley. So really like just a lot of that, honestly. Like linear algebra specifically, I was working on like some Gaussian process regression type work where there's like a lot of like linear algebra involved, and there's a lot
Mhm.
of like different tricks that you can employ to more efficiently perform computations for like
Mhm.
inference. I don't know, like, for example, like inverting matrices more quickly,
Gotcha.
or performing some like matrix decomposition in order to like that's like some order of magnitude faster in terms of like the big O runtime. And that was like always really
Mm.
cool. And there's also a lot of like applications of
That's super cool.
probability. Yeah.
Mm.
So I learned all the math and the theory and stuff, but I had no idea about like the computational and inferential like applications of these fields until I like participated in research at Livermore.
Gotcha. And then like for ramping up on like the physics side of things, like how are you able to, get that like domain knowledge or ramp up on that? Was it through like reading like research papers that your advisors gave you? Like how are you able to like synthesize that information and then apply what you learned in class?
Yeah, yeah. I always thought that was like one of the most challenging things, right? Because
Yeah,
I had the math background, but I had like no
right.
physics. Fortunately, like we were collaborating with like a team of like engineers who kind of like
Mm,
who were like specialized in physics and maybe kind of use some of the statistics in the machine learning. So obviously, I've read a lot of papers to like get some background in it, but a lot of the time spent working on that project was communicating with like the engineers who knew the actual science behind the project and who furthermore knew like what parts of the science was necessary for me to know and which parts like I didn't really have to understand for the sake of the research. So I think it's like, very important to have that sort of like interpersonal communication to understand like what aspects of the other discipline are necessary for me to bring into my side of the project.
hmm. So it seems like you probably had to take like a lot of initiative, right? Like to reach out to all these like
Oh yeah,
engineers. Wow, that must require like a lot, you know, Yeah, a lot of communication skills, right? Just like reaching out to all these different peoples and getting all those pieces of information you need to like succeed in your research.
Yeah, I think that's one
Um,
of the most like important skills as far as like undergraduate research goes. Just like first of all, knowing what you don't know, I guess in some sense, or like knowing like where the holes
mhm.
are, and then having the initiative to know to like ask people who do know like what lies inside of those holes, I guess. And I think it's
Gotcha,
like,
gotcha.
especially as an undergraduate, there's going to be a lot of holes, and it's really important to know when you are like missing some information that you can get from somebody else.
Mm. And for you, when you are like conducting your research or like writing up models or like whatever like research you're doing, when do you know like when to ask for help? Because for me, it seems like a like kind of like a balancing act,
Mm.
like of like gauging when to ask for help from like a senior software engineer in my case. Like
Yeah,
when would you usually ask for help?
yeah, totally. Um, so the first thing is that a lot of the times, like, I think it's important to just give like semi-regular updates on your work to people. Because like as you're sort of implying, I think with this question, it's kind of hard to know exactly when you know you need help. So I think it's good to tell people that are more senior than you, like roughly like what you're doing, so that they can sort of check like what you're doing, and they can sort of tell you that like you need help with this, right? So that's sort of like the first thing where even before you know to ask people for help, I think it's important to put people in the position where they know that you are in need of help, even if you don't
Yeah,
necessarily know it, right? So I think like that
right.
happens a lot. And I think like in terms of your own indicators about whether or not you need help, I feel like there's certain situations where you can sort of feel it. Like for example, like if you're doing research work, or you might be reading a paper and then you might not understand like some big section of the paper, then like that's clearly an indicator that you'll need help from somebody. Or conversely, as like an engineer, right? I feel like if there's some major part of the code base that you don't understand, like why this exists or what this is doing, and this is like relevant to your work and interacts with work that you're doing, I think it's important that like you gain an understanding of what those missing pieces are for, that maybe some senior engineer would understand better than you.
Mm, I see. Yeah, I liked how you frame that for asking for help. I think that would be super helpful for like a lot of different applications, whether you're like a software engineer or a researcher, and it applies to a lot of different disciplines. Expanding more on the research side of things, like what motivated you to pursue a master's degree right outside of college? I know you did a lot of research in undergrad and you
Yeah.
found that really exciting and rewarding. What made you motivated to take like a step further and do this 1 year's master's program at Berkeley?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing was basically that like I had studied like three different fields in my undergrad, and I enjoyed all three of them. So I don't have like any regrets about doing that. But because I was like sort of spread out between like all three things, I didn't get like I think sufficiently deep into any one subject. So a lot of that was like wanting to become a little bit more like I don't know closer to an expert. Like definitely not an expert yet on like one specific field, as opposed to just getting like breadth as opposed to depth. That was probably like a pretty big motivator for me, where I wanted to really focus in on like one subject. Uh, and secondly was that yeah, I really enjoyed like my research experiences as an undergrad, and I really just wanted like another year of that, especially because
Mm,
I wasn't and still not sure about whether or not I want to do like more graduate like school. It's like I don't know, join in the PhD route or anything. And I think like doing
mm,
the extra year of research is like could be helpful for informing that decision down the line.
mm. And for you, like, what type of student do you think would fit well into like a 1 year's master program? Like, who like would have the best time of their lives in this program? Like, what type of student are they targeting for this program?
Mhm. I think it's a really good program in that I think it targets like a variety of audiences. So I don't think there's one like super specific answer for this. I think there is both a place for people who just want to go into industry and are picking and want to pick up more skills, as well as for people who are not sure if they want to pursue like additional graduate school, but the 1 year master's program is like sort of like not too big of a commitment, or it's easier enough to pursue that. So I think both of those are pretty viable like candidates to pursue this program. Like both people who like feel they want more expertise in machine learning or computer architecture or these very like complex fields that you might need more education in before they go into like a very technical industry. Or alternatively, it would also be a good fit for somebody who is not sure about whether or not they want to do like further graduate school or not, and they feel like the 1 year master's program would be like a good, like somewhat lower commitment, like graduate opportunity.
Gotcha. And with your current work in your master's, you mentioned that you're currently doing computational biology,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. Could you like expand a little bit more of like what you're currently working on in your 1 year's master's program? It seems like a short time, like 1 year to,
yeah,
do research. So like,
yeah.
how has that experience been for you?
The nice thing about like the 5th year masters at Berkeley is that you sort of get to continue like research you were already doing as an undergrad. So I'm still working with the same
Mm,
advisor as I was working with my senior year. So even though it's only a 1 year like time to do research, which seems like a pretty short time frame, because I was working in it previously, it's actually like not too cramped, I think. But in any case, like the research that I'm working on specifically is, I guess, in the realm of DNA sequencing, where I guess if we want to get into like the technical aspects of it, in
yeah, I'm
particular,
curious.
there's like
Yeah.
a somewhat new like technology called nanopore sequencing,
Mm,
where basically you have like a pore that's like nanometers thick, hence nanopore, and you feed a DNA strand through this pore, and through this pore, perpendicular to the direction of the strand, you're running like a current of constant strength. Okay. And basically, and I'm sure you know like your bases of DNA, like ACTG, right? And based on what bases are currently in the pore, that changes the strength of the current in some characteristic fashion. So if we have like AA in the pore at some time, that'll change the current differently from if we have like TT in the pore. And
mm,
based on the current changes that we observe while feeding the strand of DNA through the pore, we can recall out what bases we fed through this pore. So that's like the technology. And
gotcha.
basically what we're working on is that you now might imagine like in addition to ACTG as your alphabet of bases, you might also have like a C prime, where C prime is like slightly different from C, which is like some chemical modification basically. And
Mm,
C prime is pretty hard to tell from C because they're like pretty similar, right? The difference between C and C prime is probably smaller than the difference between A and C, for example. Uh, and so the difference in the current that we run through the nanopore is like somewhat more subtle. And basically, we're just working on like fine tuning the inference essentially to better detect C prime, more or less.
and how do you even start attacking that sort of problem? Like that's so
Yeah,
complex already.
yeah.
Like how
Luckily,
did you
like
guys get started with that?
yeah, luckily a lot of the groundwork is already there because this technology is
Okay.
like pretty well established for the case where you just have like four bases, right? There's
Okay. Gotcha.
there's a lot of literature dating back to like I don't know 2015, 2014. People developing like various machine learning models using like hidden Markov models or recurrent neural
Right.
networks to call out these bases. And now it's all a matter of like building on top of that pre-existing work to better detect like these slight modifications. So I think that's just kind of how research works in general, right? Like you're never working like fully independently, and there's always
Right.
like there's well usually some like existing body of literature that you can work off of.
Gotcha. And I remember when I was doing research at Berkeley, I think like a huge part of like research was like writing papers. And I was curious about like your experience like writing papers in like a collaborative environment such as Berkeley. Like, what are the best ways to, I guess manage your time and make sure that you can like submit a paper on time for like a conference and stuff like that. Especially like it requires a lot of like collaboration and like synthesis of like the research you've currently done. It's hard to like piece it together sometimes.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is probably to like divide responsibilities among all the collaborators. So I think that's like again, I think it comes down to knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know.
Mm,
Where I think it's important to like recognize like these are sections that other people would be more suited to write, and these are sections that I would be more suited to write. And I think that's like half the work, is like delegating like responsibilities to make sure that people understand like the methods and the results that are used for some specific section of the paper. Of course, I think like this is kind of catch-all like advice. I think there's a lot more like specifics that go in, like depending on the paper, depending on the work that you're doing.
gotcha. And for for yourself, I guess what has worked for you the best for managing your own responsibilities in your research and identifying what to focus on? Because I'm sure like research is like kind of nebulous in the sense that you could attack a problem different angles. There's a lot of different problems that you could prioritize. Like how do you, make that decision on what to work on like on a daily basis?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, Again, I think as like an undergraduate, this sort of harkens back to the idea that like, or as an undergraduate, even as me, like one person out of undergraduate, I think it's important to know that like it's helpful to be guided by other people. And to
Mm,
that end, like the most important thing for me is like generally seeking out, I guess, confirmation or approval of some specific direction that I'm going with my research. So I guess like my general workflow is that I'll form some initial direction, just sort of based on like what I think is working and just like some intuition from that. And then also reading the literature to see like what other people might be trying, and then sort of like consolidating that into one like initial direction, with which like I'll run by like, people who I think have a better idea of like what things might work. That being like advisors and people.
mm, gotcha. That's super, super interesting. And let's move on to like a totally different topic.
Yeah,
But I
sure.
was really curious about like your experiences, I guess on like the internship side of things. You've had like a lot of diverse experiences, but specifically I was really interested in your experience like being like an algo developer intern. I remember I messaged you about this in the fall because I was curious about like the financial industry and you gave me a lot of great advice. And I guess for those who don't know what like an algo developer is, could you start with that and explain like what you did as an algo developer at a high level, I guess?
Sure, yeah. So it's a quantitative research position, where basically we're looking at data sets and potential signals in markets that could inform us on like what trades could be profitable for the company. Yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
a very
And
like vague description, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, that's totally fair. And like when I read that description, I assumed like, is it like CS 170, like where it's like a little bit of step above like discrete probability, like in CS 70, where you like actually prove algorithms and like maybe write your own algorithms? Is it like similar to that,
I
or
think it's
is it a little different?
closer. It's a little bit closer to like the data science side, I would say, at least in
Oh,
terms of the work that
interesting.
I was doing. Yeah. So when I
Okay.
say like researching signals, I really mean that we're looking at like data sets and generally, I don't know, analyzing correlations between certain phenomena that we observe in the data sets compared to shifts in like prices for like in the stock market, right? So it's not really like, at least in terms of the work that I was doing, I know that it tends to vary a lot across the industry. Not really as much of like the algorithmic complexity that you might see in like CS 170 or CS61B or anything.
Oh, okay, interesting. And what do you think is helpful to get the background necessary to like succeed in that sort of role as a college student? Like, what courses should you take, or like what things should you do to prepare for that?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty like wide variety, especially because again, like I think there's a pretty wide array of responsibilities and possible projects depending on
Hmm.
what your position is, like what company you're working at. Like some people might be doing more like machine learning intensive work. Other people might be working on like portfolio optimization and the sorts of like coursework that you want to take before going into those. And those are just like two like very initial examples that come off the top of my head. Uh, the skills that you need for these different kinds of roles will vary quite significantly, I would say. But I guess speaking to my own personal experience, I would say that first of all, like just being good at coding is very important. Uh, I think it's not quite like the difference between like this sort of work and being like a software engineer is that
Hmm.
whereas as a software engineer, your code tends to be the end product.
Right.
Whereas in the work that we're doing, it's more of a means to an end, where it's more about like developing like useful analysis tools for determining like for performing our data analysis, right? But I think it's still very important to like have effective coding skills because I think that's just very useful almost no matter what kind of work you're doing. I think besides that, just like a lot of data science like courses were useful for me. I never took Data 100 or anything, but that class definitely would have been useful if I had taken it. Uh, Other courses in the data science department, like I don't know, Data 8, Data 102, similar classes like Stat 133 are certainly like very useful. And then of course like more theoretical courses like CS189, like the big machine learning
Right.
course, is like definitely very useful. So that's like the second. So I would say just like general coding skills from taking classes like 61B and 170 are useful. Data science and machine learning skills. I think there's a lot to be said for like more applied computer science courses. Like I think taking operating systems, CS1, CS2 was very useful for me.
Right.
It's a very hard class, obviously, but I think it's
Very
super
hard.
worth it. Where I think
Yeah,
it actually like
100%.
helps you understand like, computer architecture and in particular how to make code run faster, for example.
Mm.
Um, I think that's a very like useful skill that you can apply in a wide array of different circumstances. And of course, also just like pure math classes are very useful, especially when interviewing for these sorts of roles. In particular, like probability classes like E126, which is I think like stochastic processes, Stat
Mhm.
134, Stat 140, Stat 150, all like very useful classes. So I think yeah, that's like a whole like it's a big one.
Wow.
There's a lot of things that you can study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I- I- And it seems like there are a lot of different courses that you can take to develop these like great fundamentals. And you mentioned that being good at coding is the most important part for like, algo developers or like software engineers in general. And I guess like outside of that, are there any other fundamental skills that you think are important to succeed in like an algo developer role or software engineer role? Like what tips would you give to like students for like building up a great skill set to succeed in these two different fields?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think the answer is pretty different for those two fields. So I guess like for software engineering, yeah. So the number one thing, yeah, I would say just like being very good at coding. But I think a lot of like the challenges in software engineering, at least from my experience, it's been a while since I like interned as a software engineer, anyways, I guess. But in my experience, like I think a lot of the difficulty from software engineering came from managing like very vast complexity. And in particular, like when
Mm,
I was at Amazon, there's a lot of code at Amazon, right? It's a huge company, like lots of
right.
code behind the website, right?
Hmm.
And I think it takes a lot of, I guess, like organizational skill and a lot of attention to detail to understand like how your implementations will impact like pre-existing parts of the code base. So I think that's like very important. I think like a lot of the complexity of software engineering comes to understanding like its pre-existing architecture and paying very close attention to how your work might impact that like pre-existing work. So I think like
Right.
that's pretty important. So I think just like general like attention to detail and having like a keen eye for sorts of like architectural and organizational things is quite
Mm,
important. Um, yeah,
gotcha. And for that point, right? Does that tie in with, I guess, like, do you have to refactor a lot of the old code bases that you're trying to fit in your code?
yeah,
Or are
yeah,
you talking more about like when you're designing your own like architecture, making sure that it aligns with what like maybe other developers have like
yeah.
designed?
I think both of those. Yeah, like
Okay.
refactoring is a huge thing. Yeah, I spent a lot of time at
Hmm.
Amazon just like so my project was sort of like it was very much integrated into the pre-existing code there. So a lot of
Mm,
refactoring had to be done to include the stuff that I was working on.
right. Yeah, I had a similar experience like at GitHub. I had like my code was open source, so I can talk about this freely. But like for our code base runner, we had to refactor like the whole thing, which was crazy. Like trying to get
Sounds
caught up
crazy.
on like the whole code base. And it was in C sharp. I've never worked with C sharp before.
Oh,
So just
dude, that
like
sounds like that
I
sounds
had to
crazy.
talk to like two senior developers or engineers who were super helpful, but like ramping up on that knowledge and understanding why they made certain design decisions was super challenging and difficult, but it was definitely really rewarding. And if I took 162, like our operating systems class, I would have done it would have been a lot easier to
Yeah,
understand.
122 is
So
such a helpful class. It's just as far as like helping you learn how to manage like crazy complexity, right? Because
yeah,
things don't get much more complicated than operating systems, honestly, right? So if you can
100%.
correctly like manage that sort of project, that goes a long way, I think, towards like helping you understand like large scale engineering projects in the industry. Um,
Right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess as for work in the algo developer role, I think for me, again, I think there's like so many different approaches to like being a successful in these sorts of roles. But I think for me, it was like important to have good intuition for what direction to go with data sets and like what methods of analyzing data might be useful. So I think that's a little bit more of a nebulous answer. I think it just sort of
Mhm.
comes down to like have good intuition. But I think that's like pretty important as far as like not just the algo developer role, but also like data scientist roles at large.
Mm, gotcha. And I think overall, like for like all these different positions that you did, and then also like your research work, I guess like in a general scheme of things, I guess taking a step back, what made you like the happiest while you were, at Berkeley?
Oh, that's a very tough question. I was really happy at Berkeley, so lots of things to pick out from, I guess. I would probably say like the people. I think like most of the
Mhm.
things that like I think about when I think about like my favorite memories of Berkeley really come down to like the people that I was around. I think there's like several manifestations of that, I guess. Like just generally like socializing and stuff. Like be it at parties or at like study sessions throughout the night, right? I think that was always like a lot of fun. I really enjoyed like all the camaraderie between people who were like stroking through the same classes, working on projects together. I think a lot of my fondest memories just come from like spending time with other people and like I don't know, building up those bonds and relationships. Um, I guess on a more like individual scale, I also really enjoyed just coming to realize like how much I learned over the course of like a
Right.
semester, a year, or like all 4 years of my undergrad. I feel like every semester, like I think at some point in finals week, I would like take like 10 seconds, just be like, wait, I like learned like so much, right? Yeah, and it's
Right.
crazy, right? You don't really think about it too much, I feel like, when you're in the thick of it because you're just trying to get
Right.
the A and like really
Yeah.
struggling with that because classes are hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's like very satisfying to realize like how far you've come since like the beginning of college or the beginning of the year or the beginning of the semester. And that was always like
Mm.
very happy for me to like I don't know like realize how much I learned.
Yeah. I think that's super, super rewarding too, personally, just seeing like the growth at the end of the year
Yeah,
or like taking some time to reflect. And I think that's important. And I've been having more time since it's like COVID season. So it's like harder to go out. And I've spent a lot more time reflecting. And it's crazy to think about like how different you are like entering Berkeley. And now like in the later years, you're
no,
like, wow,
yeah,
I've totally like learned so much, grown,
yeah.
hopefully. And it's just
I know
crazy.
it's insane, right? Yeah, like I feel like I was like an entirely different person from who I was like 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite amazing.
Yeah,
And you
when I
mentioned
first
a
came to
lot.
Berkeley,
Yeah,
oh
go
sorry,
ahead.
go on.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, when I first came to Berkeley, like I had no intention to like write any code in my entire life, right? I was like a math
Wow.
major. Yeah, I like never want to touch code. My parents told me to like try like CS, and I was like, I don't want to. I just want to like do math all day. And I actually wanted to be a lawyer at some point too, and that was like a huge thing for me because I was like a big
Interesting.
debater. Yeah, I was like a big debater in high school. I really wanted to like keep arguing with people. I guess I was like being a lawyer sounds pretty good for that. Then I tried engineering. It's like, oh, people still argue here a lot, right? So maybe this is cool.
That's so funny.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I feel like it's really cool to see like the trajectory from where I started, I guess. Yeah.
Right. And I think what's even greater is like what you mentioned is like studying with people is like awesome as well. I think when you see like other people like in your close circle also grow together, that's
Yeah.
when it like is really really awesome. And just seeing other people succeed in whatever areas they're pursuing is really
So yeah, I
awesome.
feel like a lot of my friends are like going in very like vastly different directions, but they're all like very successful. And I'm like, this is really awesome to see. And it's like
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see like where all the people I met in Berkeley like end up like 5, 10 years or whatever down the line.
Yeah. And I think like what Berkeley does a really good job of, and on the flip side, maybe people think it's a bad job, is they definitely push you to your limits
Oh yeah,
academically. And
100%.
like
Yeah,
we're notorious for like our 1 week break before our finals, like called dead week,
yeah.
where you just grind and study all day long and stuff like that. Do you have any like funny stories from that? I guess like you have a great Moffat background.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. I lived like
any
my whole
interesting
life in Moffat.
stories?
I think I once like spent like 37 hours straight in Moffat one time. It was pretty insane.
Oh my god. Oh wait,
Yeah,
let me see. I think the most I spent was like maybe a whole day in main stacks, and that just
yeah.
wrecked me because it's like totally silent. This library is like totally silent. You can't make
That's
any
why I like
noise.
Moffat because people can talk here. So like it makes you like go slightly less crazy, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think I spent like yeah, I like slept here like one like I here I guess like in wherever I like in Moffat. I slept there one
really?
night like yeah, and then all nighter woke up. I brought like my toothbrush there and everything. It was pretty fun.
You're prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, and
I have a lot
like
of good memories of just like getting to Moffat at like 9 a.m. in the morning to like secure a table, and then
right.
like because you have to get the table right because like
That's
it's
super
so
hard,
crazy.
very
There's
competitive.
always people like crowding the library, right? And then
Yeah,
like my friends would come and like I would go get lunch and like other people would stay there and like keep the table down, right? You would like rotate and you would keep the
right.
table and it was like 10 p.m. and you'd like been at the table for like 13 hours. Yeah, like I felt that was like a lot of my college
Man.
friends.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I feel like I don't know if it's normal for other schools. I haven't really heard of like this like sort of phenomenon with other schools, like where like people are like studying so much, but it definitely like puts everything like kind of, I don't know, it's kind of crazy to think about like after college, you're not going to be studying like that hard like for
Yeah,
1 week, right?
yeah,
Like
it's such a uniquely like collegiate experience, right?
yeah, like for you, I know are you still taking courses, right, in your
Yeah.
master's program? Right. I guess like now that you've graduated from your like bachelor's education, are there any like things that were really helpful for like transitioning now into like a master's program and like maybe like eventually afterwards like you do your own thing which and with whatever path you choose? Like are you ready to like transition out of school perhaps or go to PhD?
Transitioning is always hard, so I don't know if I'll be
Yeah.
ready or not. But I would say like from undergrad to the master's at least was pretty smooth, if only
Hmm.
because like I'm still at the same school.
Right.
I think that's like super helpful because I still know like generally how courses at Berkeley are run, and things are different at the graduate level, obviously. But I think a lot of the same like habits are still helpful. I still study with like some of the same people who are also like doing their 5th year masters. So I think yeah, like the transition for me was pretty smooth. Uh, so I don't know. I feel like the main thing that changed was maybe just like fewer exams and just more focus on like projects and research and problem sets and stuff. But that was like pretty easy to switch
Gotcha,
up.
gotcha. And I guess like my last question in general is it seems like you had like a lot of like great experiences like academically and you also had a lot of great experience with like extracurriculars. Do you have any tips for students for like finding like those opportunities early on in school and you know pursuing it in such depth? Like how would you like advise like a freshman version of you to like take advantage of all these amazing resources at Berkeley?
Yeah, yeah. I think the number one thing I would say is to like not be scared, I guess. So I think as like at least me specifically, I don't know if this is the case for a lot of other people. I think I was like very intimidated by the environment at Berkeley. So I was like,
Mm,
people are like so smart, right?
yeah.
Like people are like, always grinding really hard. Like I don't know if they can keep up, right? Uh, and because of that, I think I sort of like avoided trying things that I felt like maybe I should have tried sooner. Like in particular, right?
Mm,
Like CS. I probably should have tried CS sooner, but part of me was like, I don't know, a little bit scared to like do something that I had no like prior experience with. Uh,
right.
I think if I could go back, I would definitely tell myself like, don't be worried, right? Because like even if you fail, like I mean, it's fine, right? I think it's better to have like tried and failed than to have like regrets like 4 years down the line about not having tried something, right?
Right.
And I think that extends like many different potential opportunities in undergraduate education, right? Like getting research opportunities, right? Like it's not a big deal if you don't hear back from the professor if you email them about like doing research with them, right? So that's like totally okay. But then if you do manage to stumble upon a good research opportunity, that could potentially be like I don't know a very formative experience for you as a young undergraduate. So I
Mm.
think like the most important thing I would say is to like not be scared and to put yourself out there because you might as well try. I would say to like get these sorts of opportunities and to experience them.
Right. And I definitely agree with you. Putting yourself out there is really important early on in college. And, applying to a bunch of places, even though you might get rejected by a lot of them, is really important so that you get some
Yep.
experience and some
It might
opportunities.
feel a little bit bad if you get rejected and stuff,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, like, it is what it is, and like, it's totally worth it if you get that one, like, yes, right?
Right. 100%. And I guess like for you personally, now that you're wrapping up your masters, is there anything that you're looking forward to like after you end your masters? Like anything exciting that you want to explore now that you've had so much education and experience in the research realm of things?
Good question. I don't know. Hard to say in the short term because of COVID. So who knows what's gonna
Yeah,
happen, right?
fair.
I'm a really big sports fan though, so I'm really excited to like start going back to sports games and stuff.
Right.
I'm a really
Oh,
big like 49ers fan. So hopefully
49ers.
they'll
They're
be
really good. Or wait, are they good now? I actually
this
don't
year they
know.
last year they were amazing. That was like the best
Yeah,
year. Yeah, excited
very,
for them
very
to like maybe
exciting.
get back in the future.
Yeah, you got Garoppolo. That's all I know about the
Oh
49ers.
yeah, yeah. Let's see if he's still in the team next year. I don't even know anymore.
I hope they trade it to the Patriots, my team. That would be really
Yeah, a
nice.
lot of people are. Some people are saying that. Yeah, Belichick
Oh.
gets what he wants after all, right?
Well, anyways, thank you so much for, stopping by and, shedding light about like all your research experiences, like all these amazing tips for students. I think just in general, like all this advice is so applicable to like all these different fields and all these different students who might be like interested in, these different fields that you majored in. So super, super helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you have anything that you'd like to plug at the end of the podcast?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. I was like, I think you mentioned at the very beginning. I was like really actively involved with SAS, the Student Association for Applied Statistics. It's gone by a lot of names. It used to be called SUSA back in the
Yeah.
day. Uh, yeah, but I was like I still am quite involved actually. Like I'm still a senior advisor with the organization.
Wow.
I help people a lot with recruiting actually. I give very similar advice to what I've been talking about today.
That's
So I think in
awesome.
general, yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed being a part of that community and like contributing back. And overall, like it's a really good like group of people. And I would say like for anybody who's interested in like stats or applications of math and or computer science, I think it's like a really good organization.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else you like to plug personally? Any social media or you're good?
I think I'm good.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, thank you so much again for, stopping by. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.